At midnight on December 16, 1944, inside the Café Scholzen in Lanzerath, Belgium, SS Obersturmbannführer Joachim Peiper interrogated Obersturmbannführer von Hoffmann, commander of the 9th Fallschirmjäger Regiment. Von Hoffmann told him the woods ahead were heavily fortified, that there were pillboxes and mines, and that advancing was impossible under these circumstances. Peiper commanded Kampfgruppe Peiper, the armoured spearhead of the 1st SS Panzer Division. He later stated, "I asked him for all the information that he had on the enemy situation. At this point I became very angry and ordered the Fallschirmjäger Regiment to give me 1 battalion and I would lead the breakthrough." The fortifications were 18 Americans in holes covered with pine logs. A 20-year-old lieutenant named Lyle Bouck, a technical sergeant named William Slape, and men who had been told to hold, promised help, and left alone. The popular version of this story says German soldiers could not act without officers. The German army had the oldest and strongest non-commissioned officer tradition in Europe, and a doctrine built on it. Auftragstaktik, mission command. The U.S. Army's own academic study of the period argues the opposite of the legend. The monograph, The Evolution of the American NCO, 1939 to 1945, The Application of German Doctrine, written at the Army Command and General Staff College, states that the lack of initiative of American NCOs can be contributed to the lack of training in small unit operations and the over-reliance on officers providing direction. It states that the primary reason the German infantry squad was successful was that German NCOs had the necessary tactical skills to take the initiative, a long-standing practice in the German military tradition, and that on the German side, the absence of an officer did not hinder the execution of the mission. By 1944 and 1945, the veteran German NCO cadre had been consumed across Russia, Tunisia and Normandy, and was being replaced by Volksgrenadiers and teenagers. Across the line came an American army of civilians, mechanics, farmers, salesmen. Erwin Rommel wrote of what happened after Tunisia. "In Tunisia the Americans had to pay a stiff price for their experience," he wrote, "but it brought rich dividends. On the morning of June 6, 1944, near Exit 4 from Utah Beach, Lieutenant Colonel Patrick Cassidy, commanding the 1st Battalion of the 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment, handed Staff Sergeant Harrison the 100th, Bud Summers of West Virginia 15 men and an objective. The 15 had been scattered by the night drop and came from mixed units. Summers did not know them and they did not know him. He held no authority over them beyond what he could exercise. The objective on the map was marked WXYZ. It was a complex of buildings, and it was the barracks of a German coastal artillery unit holding more than 100 soldiers. He moved on the first building with a Thompson, alone. Only 2 men followed him, Private William Burt, Private John Camion of New York. The other 13 stayed back. For roughly 5 hours, Summers kept going, building by building. At some point in the action, Camion asked him a question. "Why are you doing it?" Summers answered, "I can't tell you." The complex was taken. Summers received the Distinguished Service Cross. He was nominated twice for the Medal of Honor and never received it. Stephen Ambrose later wrote, "Summers is a legend with American paratroopers, the Sergeant York of World War II." By July 1944, the American advance in Normandy had run into the bocage. Ancient hedgerows rose out of earth banks. A Sherman tank that tried to climb over one exposed its unprotected belly. Sergeant Curtis Culin III served with the 102nd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron, the Essex Troop of the New Jersey National Guard, operating with the 2nd Armored Division. In a troop conversation, a soldier Culin described as a Tennessee hillbilly named Roberts said, "Why don't we get some saw teeth and put them on the front of the tank and cut through these hedges?" The men laughed. Culin did not. By the accounts, Culin always insisted the credit belonged to Roberts. Roberts's full identity was never established. Culin took scrap steel from German beach obstacles, the Czech hedgehogs, off the D-Day beaches and welded 4 teeth onto the front of a Sherman. On July 14, 1944, Lieutenant General Omar Bradley came in person to watch. He watched in awe as a hedgerow exploded to make way for the Sherman bursting through. Bradley ordered mass installation. By the opening of Operation Cobra on July 25, roughly 60% of 1st Army tanks carried the device, the Rhino tank. Hedgerow cutters were reportedly developed in parallel by other American and British units. Culin's was the one that reached Bradley. General-Lieutenant Fritz Bayerlein of Panzer Lehr described Cobra from the other side. Bomb carpets laid back and forth, artillery positions wiped out, tanks overturned and buried, all roads and tracks destroyed. By midday, the entire area resembled a moon landscape, with the bomb craters touching rim to rim. All signal communications had been cut, and no command was possible. At his own command post, Bayerlein watched American reconnaissance vehicles drive past, and asked his staff how the Americans had got so far behind the German lines so fast. On December 16, 1944, at Lanzerath Ridge, 18 men of the Intelligence and Reconnaissance Platoon of the 394th Infantry Regiment, 99th Infantry Division, held a ridge under 1st Lieutenant Lyle J. Bouck. Jr. Bouck was 20 years old. With him were 4 artillery observers from Battery C of the 371st Field Artillery. Among the men on that ridge was Technical Sergeant William the 50th, Slape, the platoon's senior NCO. At 5:30 in the morning, the German artillery began. Bouck recorded. A barrage of artillery registered at about 0530 hours and continued until about 0700 hours. The artillery was relentless and frightening, but not devastating. The foxholes had overhead cover the men had improvised from pine logs 8 to 12 inches thick, which defeated the tree bursts. At about 8 o'clock, the tank destroyer unit nearby was redirected. The platoon was alone in the sector. Bouck asked permission to withdraw. The answer from regiment was to remain in position and reinforcements from the 3rd Battalion will come to support you. The reinforcements never came. Against them came about 500 German paratroopers of the 1st Battalion, 9th Fallschirmjäger Regiment. The assaults moved across a field toward a 4-foot barbed wire fence. Bouck described the first one as like shooting clay ducks in California at an amusement park. 3 frontal assaults broke there. According to the accounts, Slape kept up continuous fire through the attacks. PFC Risto Milo Milosevic worked the Jeep-mounted .50. PFC William James Tsakanicus was on the ridge as well. All 3 later received the Distinguished Service Cross, along with Bouck. The Germans requested a ceasefire under a white flag to collect wounded. The Americans granted it. At 3:50 in the afternoon, radio operator James Fort sent the last report. At dusk, about 50 men of Fusilier Regiment 27 of the 12th Volksgrenadier Division worked through the woods and around the position. A German sergeant, Vince Kuhlbach, accepted Bouck's surrender. He asked who was in command and why the Americans had continued firing. At midnight, in the Café Scholzen, the prisoners were present while Piper interrogated von Hoffmann. Kampfgruppe Piper, the spearhead of the entire Ardennes offensive, did not leave Lanzerath until 4:30 in the morning on December 17th, more than 18 hours late. Billy Queen was killed. 14 of the 18 I&R men were wounded. 21 Americans were captured. The official German report listed 16 killed, 63 wounded, and 13 missing. The platoon received no recognition during the war. The men were prisoners. Communications were lost. It took until December 14, 1979, when Public Law 96-145, signed by President Jimmy Carter, waived the legal time limit. The ceremony came on October 26, 1981. The Lanzerath platoon became known as the most decorated American unit of its size of World War II. On December 17, 1944, at Stavelot, Belgium, The American official history states, "The only combat troops in the town at this time were a squad from the 291st Engineer Combat Battalion, which had been sent from Malmedy to construct a roadblock on the road leading to the bridge. Not a regiment, not a division, a squad of road builders. Their sergeant is not named in the official record. They placed a mined roadblock on the approach to the Amblev Bridge. Piper's vanguard stopped on the south bank for the night. After the war, Piper told American interrogators that Stavelot had been heavily defended. The official history notes that he confused the chronology. On December 18th, the pattern repeated. At 11:45, at Trois-Ponts, Company C of the 51st Engineer Combat Battalion under Captain Sam Schuber destroyed the Amblev crossing. At 1 o'clock, the lower Seine Bridge went down. At 4:45, at Neuf-Moulins over the Lienne, Company A of the 291st Engineer Combat Battalion under 1st Lieutenant Alvin Edelstein faced Piper's lead tanks. Edelstein was an officer, not a sergeant. The first tank opened fire. The engineers answered with 2,500 pounds of TNT. The bridge went up. Piper is reported to have struck his tank and cursed the damned engineers. The line is a post-war reconstruction, not a recording. On December 19th, at Stavelot, Captain Leland E. Kofer of Company A, 105th Engineer Battalion, placed 20 50-pound boxes of TNT and detonated the bridge.